In August 2017, a single net pen collapsed in the waters off Cypress Island, Washington. Within hours, 260,000 Atlantic salmon, a species that does not naturally exist in the Pacific Ocean, poured into the Salish Sea. The escaped fish weighed a combined 615,000 pounds. They represented the largest single aquaculture failure in United States history. What followed was not just an environmental disaster, but a billion-dollar collision between industrial food production and one of the most fragile salmon ecosystems on Earth. This is the story of how corporate efficiency met ecological chaos, how emergency harvest operations mobilized across 3 nations, and how a species bred for captivity became an invasive force threatening orcas, indigenous fisheries, and the genetic future of wild Pacific salmon. By the end of this documentary, you will understand the hidden architecture of modern aquaculture, the true cost of farmed salmon, and why this invasion was not an accident, but an inevitability. Stay with us. Washington Salmon Invasion, how 260,000 escaped fish sparked a $1 billion ecological takeover. Salmon are not just fish. They are architects of ecosystems. In the Pacific Northwest, 5 species of wild Pacific salmon, Chinook, coho, sockeye, pink, and chum, have shaped rivers, forests, and human cultures for millennia. When salmon die after spawning, their bodies deliver marine nutrients hundreds of miles inland. Trees grow faster near salmon streams. Bears, eagles, and orcas depend on their annual return. Indigenous tribes have built economies, spirituality, and food sovereignty around salmon runs for over 10,000 years. Atlantic salmon are biologically similar but ecologically foreign. Salmo salar evolved in the cold rivers of Europe and the North Atlantic. They do not belong in the Pacific. Yet in the 1980s, aquaculture companies introduced them to the waters of British Columbia and Washington State. The reason was simple. Atlantic salmon grow quickly in captivity, tolerate high densities, and produce firm, oily fillets that command premium prices in global markets. By 2017, salmon farming had become a $700 million industry in the Pacific Northwest. Massive net pen operations floated in bays and straits, each pen holding tens of thousands of fish. These pens were designed to keep fish in, but they were never designed to survive catastrophic structural failure. And when they failed, the collision between industrial aquaculture and wild ecosystems became unavoidable. The central question of this documentary is not whether farmed salmon can escape. They already have, repeatedly, in Norway, Chile, Scotland, and Canada. The question is what happens when they do. What happens when a species optimized for efficiency invades a wilderness shaped by 10,000 years of evolutionary balance? That is the story we are about to tell. Salmon farming arrived in the Pacific Northwest in the early 1980s. The model was imported from Norway, where Atlantic salmon had been raised in fjords since the 1960s. The economics were compelling. Wild salmon were becoming scarce due to overfishing, habitat destruction, and dam construction. Farmed salmon could be produced year-round, standardized in size and fat content, and sold at prices lower than wild-caught fish. Cook Aquaculture, a Canadian multinational, operated the net pen facility at Cypress Island through its subsidiary, Cook Pacific. The site consisted of multiple underwater enclosures anchored to the seafloor in water 60 feet deep. Each pen was constructed from steel frames and tensioned netting designed to hold up to 300,000 pounds of live fish. The pens were positioned in marine waters leased from Washington State. The failure occurred on August 8, 2017. Routine inspections had noted biofouling, the accumulation of mussels, barnacles, and algae on the nets, which increased drag and stress on the structure. A severe algae bloom in the preceding weeks had reduced oxygen levels and increased fish mortality within the pens. Then an unusually strong tidal current struck the weakened infrastructure. The steel frame buckled, the netting tore open. Within 6 hours, an estimated 260,000 Atlantic salmon escaped into the Salish Sea. State and regulatory agencies and environmental groups had warned Cook Aquaculture about aging infrastructure at the Cypress Island site. Inspection reports from 2016 flagged corrosion and inadequate maintenance. Washington's Department of Fish and Wildlife had recommended structural upgrades. Cook delayed. The company later attributed the collapse to exceptional tides, but investigations revealed that the pen's anchoring system had not been replaced in over a decade. The escape was not an anomaly. Between 2000 and 2017, over 2 million farmed salmon escaped from facilities in British Columbia alone. Smaller escape events in Washington, Alaska, and Maine had gone largely unnoticed by the public. But Cypress Island was different. The sheer volume of escaped fish, combined with growing political opposition to net pen aquaculture, transformed a containment failure into a regulatory crisis. What followed was an unprecedented mobilization. State and tribal agencies issued emergency fishing permits. Commercial fishermen were contracted to catch as many escaped salmon as possible. Genetic monitoring teams fanned out across rivers to track whether Atlantic salmon were attempting to spawn, and scientists began calculating the long-term ecological cost of 250,000 invasive fish now swimming free in one of the most biodiverse marine regions in North America.
The damages began immediately. Atlantic salmon are voracious predators. Each adult consumes several pounds of herring, anchovies, and juvenile salmon per week. The escaped fish dispersed rapidly across Puget Sound, the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and the Georgia Strait. They competed directly with wild Pacific salmon for food in an ecosystem already under severe pressure from declining prey availability, warming waters, and pollution. Disease transmission posed the second major threat. Farmed salmon are raised at densities up to 50,000 fish per pen. These conditions breed parasites and pathogens. Sea lice, a parasitic crustacean that feeds on salmon's skin and blood, proliferate in farms and transfer to wild fish. Studies in British Columbia have documented sea lice infestations reducing juvenile wild salmon survival by up to 95% in areas near net pens. The escaped Cypress Island salmon carried unknown loads of lice, bacteria, and viruses into waters frequented by endangered wild Chinook. Genetic dilution is the third and most insidious damage. Atlantic salmon have been selectively bred for docility, rapid growth, and tolerance of crowding. These traits make them inferior survivors in the wild, but capable of interbreeding with Pacific salmon under certain conditions. Although Atlantic and Pacific salmon are different species, hybridization has been documented in rivers where both populations coexist. Even failed spawning attempts by Atlantic salmon can disturb gravel beds used by wild Pacific salmon, reducing the survival of wild eggs. The economic damage extended beyond ecology. Southern resident orcas, an endangered population of 73 whales, depend almost entirely on Chinook salmon. The whales were already starving due to decades of salmon decline. The introduction of 250,000 fish that consume but do not contribute to the orca's food web worsened an already dire situation. Tribal fisheries, guaranteed by treaties signed in the 1850s, depend on predictable salmon returns. The Lummi Nation, Swinomish tribe, and others mobilized emergency response teams to protect their ancestral resources. But the escape must be understood within the broader context of why salmon farming exists. The industry generates $700 million annually in Washington and British Columbia. It employs over 5,000 people in rural coastal communities where alternative livelihoods are scarce. Salmon farming produces 50,000 metric tons of protein per year in the Pacific Northwest alone, enough to feed millions. Farmed salmon costs less than wild salmon. A pound of farmed Atlantic sells for $8 to $12 wholesale. Wild Chinook can command $30 per pound. For consumers, farmed salmon provides affordable, high-quality protein. For retailers, it ensures year-round supply unaffected by seasonal variation or fishery closures. For governments, it represents food security and export revenue. The industry argues that without aquaculture, global demand for salmon would drive wild populations to collapse. Farmed salmon now accounts for 70% of all salmon consumed worldwide. Norway, Chile, Canada, and Scotland have built multi-billion-dollar export economies on Atlantic salmon. The question is not whether the industry has value. The question is whether that value justifies the ecological risks.
Within 24 hours of the escape, Washington State issued emergency harvest orders. The goal was simple: catch as many Atlantic salmon as possible before they dispersed beyond recovery. Tribal fisheries, recreational anglers, and commercial vessels were mobilized. The Department of Fish and Wildlife suspended bag limits and opened waters normally closed to fishing. The message was clear: every escaped salmon removed was one less threat to wild populations. Tribal fishermen responded first. The Lummi Nation, whose reservation lies near Cypress Island, deployed gillnet boats within hours. Gillnets are vertical walls of monofilament that entangle fish by their gills. Tribal crews worked around the clock, setting nets in channels and bays where escaped salmon were reported. Each net stretched 300 to 600 feet and was checked every few hours. Fish were hauled aboard, sorted, and transported to processing facilities on ice. Recreational anglers joined the effort. Fishing derbies were organized with prizes for the most Atlantic salmon caught. Fly fishermen, trollers, and kayakers combed shorelines and estuaries. Social media groups coordinated sightings. Within the first week, over 4,000 Atlantic salmon were reported caught by recreational anglers alone. The fish were identifiable by their spotted gill plates, forked tails, and absence of the distinctive markings that differentiate Pacific species. Commercial purse seine vessels were contracted by Cook Aquaculture to recapture fish. Purse seines are massive circular nets deployed from boats, drawn tight at the bottom like a drawstring purse and hauled aboard with hydraulic winches. These vessels, typically used for herring and sardine fishing, were redirected to hunt escaped salmon. Crews worked under contract, paid per fish recovered. The operation resembled a military extraction: spotter planes, sonar tracking, coordinated vessel movements. Tracking the escaped salmon proved difficult. Unlike Pacific salmon, which return to natal rivers to spawn, Atlantic salmon have no home stream in the Pacific. They dispersed unpredictably. Some moved north into Canadian waters, others swam south toward Puget Sound. Genetic analysis of captured fish revealed that many had traveled over 100 miles from the escape site within 2 weeks. By October 2017, state and tribal agencies estimated that between 35 and 50,000 Atlantic salmon had been recovered. That left over 200,000 unaccounted for. Some likely died from stress, predation, or starvation, but many survived. Sightings continued for months. Fishermen reported catching Atlantic salmon in rivers from British Columbia to Oregon. Biologists found Atlantic salmon carcasses in spawning streams where they had no evolutionary history. The hunt revealed the limitations of emergency response. Once invasive fish are loose in open water, recapture becomes statistically impossible. The ocean is too vast, the fish are too mobile, and the ecosystem provides no natural barrier. The The hunt was not a solution, it was damage control.
To understand why 260,000 salmon could escape from a single pen, you must understand the industrial scale of modern aquaculture. Salmon farming is not fishing, it is livestock production conducted underwater. The process begins in freshwater hatcheries. Atlantic salmon eggs are fertilized artificially and incubated in temperature-controlled tanks. Fry hatch after 6 to 8 weeks. They are raised in fresh water for 12 to 18 months until they undergo smoltification, a physiological transformation that allows them to survive in salt water. During this phase, fish are vaccinated against bacterial diseases, graded by size, and culled for deformities. Smolts are transferred to saltwater net pens when they reach 6 to 8 inches in length. The pens are anchored in bays, fjords, or straits, where water temperatures remain between 8 and 14 degrees Celsius year-round. Each pen holds between 50,000 and 150,000 fish. Densities can reach 30 kilograms of fish per cubic meter of water, equivalent to a bathtub filled with salmon. Feed is delivered by automated systems multiple times per day. The feed is manufactured from fish meal, fish oil, soy protein, and synthetic vitamins. It takes 3 to 5 pounds of wild-caught fish, anchovies, herring, sardines to produce 1 pound of farmed salmon. The fish grow rapidly. Within 18 months, they reach market weight of 10 to 12 pounds. Disease is managed through antibiotics, vaccines, and chemical treatments. Sea lice are controlled by adding pesticides to the water or by deploying cleaner fish, wrasse and lumpfish that eat lice off salmon skin. Mortality rates in well-managed farms average 5 to 10%. In poorly managed farms or during disease outbreaks, mortality can exceed 30%. Dead fish are removed daily by suction pumps and disposed of in rendering facilities. Harvest occurs when fish reach target size. Divers seal the pen and pump the fish through a tube into a harvest barge. The fish are stunned with a percussive blow to the head or exposed to carbon dioxide. They are bled, gutted, and chilled to near freezing temperatures within minutes. The entire harvest of a single pen, 300,000 pounds of live fish, can be completed in 6 hours. Processing occurs in coastal facilities equipped with industrial filleting lines. Fish are mechanically scaled, beheaded, and gutted. Fillets are cut by machine or by hand, trimmed, inspected, and vacuum sealed. Some are frozen immediately for export. Others are sold fresh to distributors within 48 hours. The bones, heads, and offal are processed into fish meal and pet food. The supply chain is global. Norwegian genetics, Chilean feed mills, Canadian pens, American processing plants, Japanese and European markets. The system is optimized for volume and profit. A single net pen represents millions of dollars in capital investment, thousands of tons of feed, and months of labor. When that pen collapses, the financial loss is immediate, but the ecological cost unfolds over decades.
The salmon fillet sitting on ice at your local grocery store does not tell you its story. There is no label indicating whether the fish escaped from a pen, whether it consumed wild juveniles, or whether it carried parasites into endangered orca habitat. The packaging says Atlantic salmon. It lists the country of origin. It provides nutritional information. It costs $9 per pound. Most consumers cannot distinguish farmed from wild salmon by appearance. Farmed Atlantic salmon has a lighter orange color due to synthetic astaxanthin added to feed. Wild Pacific salmon has deeper red flesh from naturally consumed krill and shrimp. Farmed salmon has visible fat lines and a milder flavor. Wild salmon is leaner and more robust, but once cooked, these differences blur. Restaurants rarely specify the origin of their salmon. A menu might say Atlantic salmon with seasonal vegetables. It does not say net pen aquaculture, Puget Sound, escaped stock. Chefs choose farmed salmon for consistency.
The fillets are uniform in size and fat content. They arrive year-round. They cost less than wild Chinook, which is seasonal, variable, and expensive. The consumer paradox is this. People want wild salmon symbolism, sustainability, purity, connection to nature, but they want farmed salmon prices. The industry has capitalized on this contradiction by branding farmed salmon as responsibly raised, ocean-friendly, and sustainably sourced. Certification schemes like the Aquaculture Stewardship Council provide green labels that reassure buyers without requiring substantive ecological accountability. The escaped Cypress Island salmon entered this supply chain invisibly. Some were recovered and sold by tribal and commercial fishermen as wild-caught Atlantic salmon, a rarity in Pacific markets that commanded premium prices. Others were consumed by orcas, seals, and larger fish. A few may have been caught by recreational anglers and grilled at backyard barbecues, mistaken for coho or Chinook. But the larger reality is this. The escaped fish represent a fraction of the farmed salmon consumed annually in North America. Over 500,000 metric tons of farmed salmon are produced in Canada and the United States each year. The Cypress Island escape was a visible failure. The invisible failure is the normalization of an industrial food system that depends on ecological externalities, parasites, genetic pollution, nutrient loading, and antibiotic use that the consumer never sees. Chefs and buyers who prioritize sustainability face difficult choices. Wild salmon is expensive, seasonal, and scarce. Farmed salmon is cheap, available, and ecologically destructive. Land-based recirculating aquaculture systems, closed-loop farms that eliminate ocean pollution, are emerging but remain expensive and limited in scale. The choice is not simple, but it is real. In August 2017, 260,000 Atlantic salmon escaped into the Salish Sea. The event sparked emergency response operations across 3 jurisdictions. It mobilized tribal nations, state agencies, and commercial fleets. It exposed regulatory gaps, corporate negligence, and the fragility of net pen aquaculture. But it did not stop salmon farming. Today, net pen operations continue in British Columbia. Washington State has banned new permits for Atlantic salmon farms, but existing operations remain. Norway, Chile, and Scotland have expanded production. Global demand for salmon has grown by 30% since 2017. The industry argues that improved technology, stronger nets, and better monitoring will prevent future escapes. But the logic of industrial aquaculture ensures that escapes will happen again. Systems optimized for efficiency are not optimized for containment. The question we began with was whether industrial food systems can coexist with wild ecosystems. The answer is that they can, but only if the full cost is accounted for. The cost of Cypress Island was not just the fish that escaped, it was the sea lice transferred to wild juveniles. It was the genetic dilution of native populations. It was the food stolen from starving orcas. It was the erosion of tribal sovereignty over resources guaranteed by treaty. And it was the normalization of risk in an industry built on the assumption that nature can absorb our mistakes. Containment is not a technical problem, it is an economic one. As long as the cost of escape is lower than the cost of prevention, escapes will continue. As long as consumers demand cheap salmon without asking where it comes from, the system will prioritize volume over stewardship. And as long as regulatory frameworks treat aquaculture as agriculture rather than ecosystem intervention, the collision between farmed and wild will repeat. The Cypress Island escape was not an accident, it was a preview. The question is not whether another collapse will occur. The question is whether we will recognize it for what it is, a choice between convenience and consequence, between industrial efficiency and ecological integrity. The salmon have already decided. The ocean does not distinguish between farmed and wild. It only measures survival. And in that measurement, every escaped fish is a test we are failing.